Hey friends, how are you all? It is 12:01 on the West Coast. I'm visiting my friend Wendy in San Diego. And as many of you know from reading Wake Up Call this morning, I'm about to have a conversation with Jonathan Greenblatt. He's the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Hi, Lindsay. I hope that you all will listen to this conversation because Jonathan has written a very important book called It Could Happen Here, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable. And so I'm as I said, very excited to be having a conversation with Jonathan, who happens to be one of my favorite people on the planet, even though probably thinks I'm weird to say that. And I'd love to take some of your questions. We solicited some questions on social media. And so I'll be talking to you and certainly giving you those questions as well. I'm just waiting for Jonathan. He is under the ADL account. So anyway, he's talking about hate speech, hate crimes, and how they're on the rise and what we as concerned citizens can do about this. And the book is incredible. It's really well done, really well written. And I can ask Julia, who did an excellent job helping me prepare for this interview, where Jonathan is, because I don't see him under the ADL account. So let me just double check, you guys. Julia, how you doing? I see he's going to be under the ADL national account. He just joined. Okay, let me take a look at this. It's weird because I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing his account, Julia. Let's see. You guys stand by. Thank you for your patience. My friend Wendy can I search for him? Sure. I'll do that. Here, I'll do a search. ADL National. I didn't invite him. Here we go. Thank you guys for your patience. Here we go. Now I see him. Anyway, Jonathan's going to tell us a little bit about the book, about the rise in hate crimes and anti-Semitism in the country. Hey, Jonathan, how are you?
Hey, Kate. Hey, sorry about that.
Don't worry.
To see you.
No problem. I just so appreciate you spending some time with us today. And congratulations on your book, Jonathan. I was telling everyone it's called It Could Happen Here, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. So I have a lot of questions about it. But first of all, why did you decide to write this book? Why now, Jonathan?
Well, it's something we've talked before as we've watched it feels like the world, even the country, just the wheels come off. And after January 6th, I had been working on a proposal for a book. And after January 6th, I turned to my team and I said, I got to get this thing out. And because in many ways, January 6th was so crazy. And yet in many ways, it was incredibly predictable. And I think we're just living in this moment now where hate has been amplified to such a level that I think it's really shaking the foundation of society. And I don't think any of this is preordained. I don't think we have to go in a direction where minorities or other particular people feel so scapegoated, feel so targeted that everything unravels. But if we don't act, Katie, there's no natural law that tells us that democracy persists forever. And as remarkable as that may sound, and I'm still someone who's very optimistic about America, democracy is not a spectator sport that you can watch from the cheap seats. And Jews have learned this the hard way over the centuries. And so I'm worried. I'm worried in this moment, more so than ever.
I know that this book is deeply personal to you, that you dedicate it to your grandfather, Bernard, who was a Holocaust survivor, Jonathan.
Yeah.
How did that inform the way you wrote this book, or has informed, honestly, your life's work?
It's funny, my grandfather really was my hero growing up, and he never talked about the Holocaust. He was didn't talk to my dad and his brothers about it, or to me and my brother and my cousins. And then one day a class, like a high school class project, I said, could I interview you? And he agreed. the first time he opened up about it. And the thing that was so interesting, among other things, was he described to me, Katie, how when he was a young man growing up in Germany, he never could have imagined that the only country he ever knew would one day turn on him, right? Regard him as an enemy of the state, destroy everything that he ever loved, and slaughter almost his entire family and his friends, and force him to flee to this country. And, you know, he never lost his sense of hope, his optimism. He came here with literally nothing, no language, no money, nothing. And he carved out a middle-class life in Bridgeport, Connecticut. But when I said to him, you know, could you ever imagine that your grandchildren, during that interview, when I was like a junior in high school, could you ever imagine that your grandchildren like me and my sibling and my cousins would be born in America? Did you have American grandchildren? My grandfather had a thick German accent. He came here in his like late 20s. He said, "Ach, no, never." He said, "If anywhere, Germany, because where else would we be?" Flash forward, Katie, maybe 15 years later, I am sitting in my in-laws apartment, my in-laws condo in Los Angeles. Now, my in-laws also, my wife and her family also Jewish. They fled to this country from Iran. And Iran is the only place they had ever known. And after the Islamic Revolution, of course, the kind of, you know, the Khomeini and that government turned on them and regard them as enemies of the state, as Jews, destroyed everything they ever loved, and forced them to flee for their lives, and they came to this country. And so it's 15 years later, and I'm sitting with my father-in-law and my oldest, when he was still just crawling, wasn't even talking yet. And I said, Mansour Khan, to my father-in-law, could you believe you have an American grandchild? And he came here in his late 40s. And he says to me with a thick Persian accent, you know, he doesn't speak great English. He basically says, never, when I was young, I could think only Iran I would be, because he says, where else would I be? And literally, where else would I be? It was the same phrase that my grandfather had used 15 years earlier. And my German Jewish grandfather, who had to flee Europe, like my Iranian Jewish father-in-law, who had to flee Iran, their stories tell me that I can't take for granted, nor you, Katie, nor any of us, that our grandchildren will be born here in America unless we fight for what we have. And that doesn't mean, you know, you have to pay a sword or something, but it means we've got to take advantage to preserve this great democracy and the privileges and protections it provides us, because if we don't, they won't be here forever.
Oh my God. I hope this is not Len Wood, who I know. Len, he wants to know how many people really died in the Holocaust. You know, I think part of this is, you know, really scary that there's still people out there who perpetuate the lie that the Holocaust never happened, which is so upsetting, so infuriating. But we can talk about that later, because I know that you're concerned that it could happen here. You write, hate is on the rise everywhere, much more than people realize. Can you give us some insights, some facts about, I know that the ADL has been tracking this. And I'd love for you to tell us about, you know, give us some cold, hard facts, Jonathan, about speech, hate crimes. And this is just not just anti-Semitism. This is hate of all kinds.
Yep. So the FBI,
since your response, way, go ahead.
So the FBI tracks hate crimes, and hate crimes are defined as, you know, misdemeanors or felonies committed against an individual or an institution based on an immutable characteristic, like an attribute that you can't change, like gender or religion or race or national origin, et cetera, sexual orientation. And they track this by getting information from law enforcement agencies across the country. So NYPD will report to the FBI.
Right.
So their last data is for 2020. We don't have 21 data yet, but 2020, they saw a 12% increase in hate crimes. 12% increase in hate crimes overall. That's after a steady climb over the last 5 years. And at ADL, we track anti-Semitic incidents. So not just felonies and misdemeanors, but also acts of harassment, Katie, like your child being yelled at on a street corner. That might not be a crime, but we track that at ADL. We have a network of 25 offices. I have 400 FTE. We investigate everything that we report. So, Katie, after a 15-year decline from 2001 to 2015, in 2016, the number leapt by about 37%. 38%, sorry, 34% in 2016, all tied to the second half of the year in the presidential. In 2017, the number went up 57%, the highest year-over-year increase we've ever seen. In 2018, the number dipped just 5%, but that was the year of Pittsburgh, the most violent anti-Semitic act in American history. In 2019, it went up another 12%. That's the highest total we have ever tracked in over 40 years. And then in 2020, we fully expected the number would plummet, Katie, because campuses were closed, businesses were shuttered, we were all kind of socially distancing at home. The number did drop just 4%. We had 2,104 incidents, the third highest total we've ever seen.
And you're but that doesn't include sort of just hate speech, hate language, all over that.
And if you look at that, so we track both these kind of anti-Semitic incidents offline. We're also tracking all kinds of hate online. We do an annual online hate and harassment survey looking just at the issues on social media, and those numbers would blow your socks off. So we found in our last survey that we did in 2021, 42% of users, 42% report having received hate or harassment directed at them based on an immutable characteristic. Again, gender, race, religion. 28% report being the target of severe, sustained harassment. So that is an extraordinarily large number. And by the way, that's social media, online gaming, this emerging world we call the Metaverse. We're looking at all of that. But I'll tell you the thing that's most damning is the place where it happens with the most frequency across these different media, far and away, Katie, is Facebook. The numbers on Facebook are roughly 3 times that of any other social media platform, including TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, and so on and so forth. Facebook far and away is the place that happens the most. I think there are a few reasons why it happens. Number one, I think Facebook is the place that's just become so charged and overwhelmed with toxicity and trolling. You can't open up someone's newsfeed without just being inundated by that. I think secondly, Facebook has failed to erect the kind of guardrails they need. There's a very libertarian ethos at the company, and they simply don't take this as seriously as the other businesses.
They claim they're a platform, not a publisher, which is obviously kind of a specious argument. But I want to get back to social media and what can be done, because, you know, I was involved in a commission on disinformation with the Aspen.
Oh, you were part of the Aspen, right? With Yasmin Green is on our board. Rashad Robinson's a close friend. You got a lot of Prince Harry helped us. You got a lot of great people who are involved in that.
Yeah, the problem is, though, everybody makes recommendations, but nothing seems to happen. But we'll talk about that in a minute, Jonathan. Tell us the pyramid of hate. That's something the ADL uses to really, I guess, show the trickle-down effect that bias and hate has, how it metastasizes and permeates society.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been using the pyramid of hate now for decades. It's a sociological model that looks at how hate can evolve and grow into something far worse if you don't interrupt it. I mean, this is basically our theory of change since the beginning. You literally have to interrupt intolerance before it mutates into something far worse. So basically the way that the model works, and we teach it, you know, ADL is one of the largest providers of anti-hate content in the country. We reach kids in classrooms all over America, and we use the pyramid of hate. So at the bottom of the pyramid are biased attitudes, right? This is having bad feelings about someone, stereotyping, fear of differences, that type of thing. A level above that are acts of bias, right? So this could be non-inclusive language that alienates someone, microaggressions, maybe biased or belittling jokes that demean someone based on their race or religion, excluding someone because of their difference. So you have kind of biased attitudes that can then morph into acts that can then morph into systemic discrimination. And this is sort of like disparities in the criminal justice system or inequitable employment opportunities, where the bias becomes, again, systematized across a framework. And then the level up from that is bias-motivated violence, threats, desecration, arson, assault. And then above that is actual genocide. Actually, the act or the deliberate attempt to extinguish a people based on their difference. Now, when I was writing this book and working on like the proposal or the treatment, people were like, come on, this is ridiculous. There's never going to be anything like that in America. But then you just look at the way we've marginalized, say, some of these immigrants from, Latin America who come up here, right? Widespread bias, or better yet, look at AAPI people. So widespread bias out there, kind of subtle, funny jokes, whatnot, manifested into actual acts where people are avoiding Asian people on the street because they think they carry COVID, because the former president and others would repeat these stupid lies, manifests into kind of systemically keeping them out of certain places, and then explodes into the kind of mass casualty violence we saw in Atlanta last year. And so, again, if we don't tear this stuff out at the roots, Katie, things can metastasize to something quite frightening. And I use the book to describe examples. It happened in Bosnia. It happened in Rwanda. It's not that far away.
Let's talk about, when you say it could happen here, what do you mean? What is it, Jonathan?
Well, when I used it here, I meant the singling out and persecution of a people because of their difference. But I think it could be, I don't know, an insurrection, a civil war. Again, I think about what the world that my grandfather grew up in before the rise of the Third Reich. Germany was one of the most cosmopolitan, civilized countries on the planet. Or the world that my wife grew up in Iran, a cosmopolitan civilization, that millennial civilization. And suddenly everything unraveled. So there was the Third Reich and there was the Islamic Revolution. Could it happen here today? Look, if a small group of people are able to subvert our democracy, could they indeed upend life as we know it? I think they could. And don't think this is like hyperbole. We literally saw what happened last January, where men wearing 6 MWE, 6 million wasn't enough, T-shirts rampaged through the Capitol building. And now some members of Congress tell us it was just a tour. They were tourists, right? They took zip ties so they could kidnap and kill legislators. So could be, again, societal dissolution. It could be civil war in the streets. And that might look like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, a perennial kind of low-level guerrilla war. But we have more guns in America today, Katie, than we do people, right? We have 380 million guns in circulation. That is astonishing when you look at the level of division and rancor that's out there right now. The data tells us our country is more polarized than it's been since the Civil War of 1861. I mean, I'm worried. I'm flat out worried.
So I'm talking to Jonathan Greenblatt, if you're just joining us, who's the head of the Anti-Defamation League, who's written a new book called It Could Happen Here, Why America is Turning from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. I'm getting a lot of questions through social media and on this IG Live, Jonathan, who want to know what they can do. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But I thought there was a disconnect. Anti-Semitic attitudes are at a historic low, and yet anti-Semitic incidents are almost double today what they were just 5 or 6 years ago. How can that be?
This is the normalization of extremism. So President Trump and others have allowed people to move from the margins into the mainstream, who are willing to act on their impulses in a way that doesn't typically happen in polite society. So the emboldenment of extremists gives them the license, if you will, to do the kind of things that just didn't used to happen before. Last May, after the fighting in Gaza, we saw a 115% spike in anti-Semitic incidents across the country in May 21 versus May 2020. Now, what does that mean? It meant Jews getting beaten up in broad daylight in Times Square, getting assaulted in southern Florida, having in Los Angeles, having a car drive down a boulevard. Men jumped out in the Jewish neighborhood of Pico Robertson and asked diners who were sitting outside eating in a COVID smart way, are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? And then attacking the people who identified as Jewish. Now, look, just so we're clear with one another, there have always been strong feelings about what's happening in the Middle East. But that isn't licensed to beat up people because they're Jewish. Nobody asked them what they think about the two-state solution, Katie. If they were wearing a kippah, or they said they were Jewish and they were in a Jewish neighborhood, they were targeted. And to show you the example of this, or to draw a parallel. So think about anti-Asian hate. People can have very strong feelings about Beijing and the way they treat the Uyghurs, or the way they've handled democracy protests in Hong Kong, or the surveillance state. But no one would argue that those strong feelings should give you the license to beat up elderly Asian American people in broad daylight. Nobody thinks that that's a normal way to act on your anger or frustration. But when these Jews were getting beaten up, Katie, I'll be honest with you, there was widespread silence in the media. Like the companies that came out against AAPI hate, against anti-Black racism after the death of George Floyd said, you know what, this is too political for us. You might not like the way that the Saudis treated Khashoggi, but that is no excuse to go militate in front of mosques or to attack women wearing hijabs. And you might have strong feelings about what Israel's doing in the territories, but that is no excuse to attack people because they're wearing a kippah. But that's the kind of extremism that I think has seeped into the bloodstream. And that happened, and there was, other than Jewish groups, Katie, there wasn't widespread revulsion in the public conversation. And that's really, it's jarring for the Jewish people.
You have a chapter called American Berserk, which is Philip Roth's notion, the novelist, that suggests that American violence is not only native to Americans, but intrinsic to them, that it lurks just beneath the surface and can be set off at any time, that it partakes of the madness particular to mobs that you ignore at your peril. You write that the American berserk is appearing to have a resurgence. Can you help me understand the American berserk?
Look, I mean, this is a country that was forged by pioneers who, as the mythos, the American mythos goes, who tamed the Wild West. You and I both know that means that slaughtered indigenous people, who grew this power out of nothing. But you and I both know they did that on the backs of enslaved Africans, the industrial power that was the United States in the 1800s. And I think today we still have this macho pioneer ethos that's right below the surface. And you see it in these armed militia movement that has exploded in popularity in the last several years. Now, again, our prior president sort of gave them the license to do so when he asked the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. But the scariest thing about the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters is how widespread the participation is, Katie. And again, the prevalence of guns and the super hot rhetoric about Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Anthony Fauci and the Democrats makes one feel like we are a match throw away from the whole thing lighting up. And again, I think while right-wing extremism absolutely, Katie, has led to more of the hate-related murders than any other movement in the United States, again, as I was just explaining what we saw happen here last spring, I worry about antipathy on the far left as well, swelling and growing in opposition to the extreme right. So these twins of illiberalism and extremism, I think they really are marginal phenomenon, but they're shaking society to a degree that could break it for all of us.
Let's talk about the recent attack at that synagogue in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where the hostages were held for 11 hours. The FBI said, quote, "This attack underscored the continued threat of violent extremists posed to religious institutions, particularly Jewish institutions." What can be done to, I mean, one thing that's interesting is I had to wonder, obviously, after the Tree of Life massacre in which 11 people in that synagogue were murdered, why hasn't security around synagogues been increased?
Well, it actually, Katie, it's interesting, it has increased. So we work with synagogues all over the country. I was really touched when Rabbi Charlie, in his first interview after the attack, he credited the FBI, law enforcement, and ADL with giving him the training that helped him survive. That was pretty awesome. So it has increased, but think about what happened here. This man went up to the synagogue, knocked on the door, and Rabbi Charlie opened it up and said, "Come on in," and gave him a cup of tea. Like, it's in the Jewish tradition. There's a tradition of hospitality and greeting the stranger.
Well,
so
that happens in churches too. You know, I think that happened in Charleston.
Yes.
And this openness of the faith community, which is a beautiful thing, but unfortunately now a very dangerous thing. And
I mean, you know, so a lot of synagogues now have done, like Rabbi Charlie and Beth Israel, They've done drills, active shooter drills, you know, hostage, if they're in a hostage situation, drills. They know where their fire exits are. They know how to, they have installed cameras and special locks and things like that. Some of them use actually, Katie, license plate readers. But the reality is you can never build walls high enough. You need to be safe. But again, for the Christian tradition or the Muslim tradition or the Jewish tradition that believes in welcoming the stranger, we have to not only secure ourselves with 21st century technology, we also, I think, have to find security through solidarity, which is finding ways to work with these other communities and build the kind of, inoculate ourselves by working with others. I mean, I don't think you can, walling yourself off will never work as a strategy.
I think what you were talking about earlier, how this hate has permeated so many aspects of our society. It's not just, obviously these attacks are horrific. And it's interesting when I thought about the Tree of Life versus the one in Texas. The one in Texas was a British citizen angry about foreign policy. And
right.
Pittsburgh was this right-wing extremist, right? That was more homegrown terrorism.
Yeah. So in Pittsburgh, it was it like a lone wolf,
right,
who had been radicalized by white supremacist kind of propaganda, who thought Jews were committing white genocide and bringing immigrants and refugees into the country to destroy the white race. Definitely a classic right-wing conspiracy-minded person. And then in Colleyville, like you said, this was a foreign national who was basically a radicalized Islamist who wanted to free an Al-Qaeda operative. So whether it's like a radical Islamist point of view or a right-wing white supremacist point of view, the scary thing is Jews find themselves in the kind of Venn diagram, in that overlap for all these different ideologies.
I think what's also interesting that you talk about in the book is the anti-vaccine crowd and how that has been weaponized and used against Jews in a tale that's old as time. Can you explain that?
Oh, gosh. So it's so interesting. So here's a great example, like ripped from the headlines, if they might say. So indeed, when the COVID thing started, it's almost 2 years ago, right? There were accusations that it was a bioweapon developed by the Jewish people or the Jewish state. And then there were accusations that Jews were singularly spreading the virus, and then that Jews were profiting from the virus. And so we've tried to knock down these crazy tropes, these insane ideas. But just this weekend, we had a group called the Goyim Defense League. They're not nice people. They're a right-wing lunatic group. I shouldn't say lunatic. They're evil. They're evil. And they did leaflet drops in suburban homes in 6 different states over the weekend: Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, Annapolis, Maryland, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Denver, Colorado. I think they were in, I said San Francisco. So a bunch of states. And the leaflet basically says, COVID is a Jewish problem, or COVID is a Jewish strategy. And it details all the people they say involved in COVID, from Anthony Fauci, not Jewish, to Joe Biden, not Jewish. All these other people are being manipulated by the Jews. COVID is a Jewish plot. That was this weekend, like last night. Again, probably 15, 16 neighborhoods, 6 states. And then yesterday, Robert Kennedy, the son of the assassinated presidential candidate, was comparing himself to Anne Frank in a big rally in D.C. and claiming that, again, the people who are against the vaccine are like Holocaust victims. I mean, one is Holocaust distortionism from the far left. One is evil, classic anti-Semitism from the far right. All of it is ugly. And all of it intentionally undermines the Jewish narrative by normalizing kind of extremism that I think is really quite scary.
Somebody commented that my question about increased security at synagogues sounded like victim blaming, but that was not true at all. And that was rooted in the fact that you are frustrated by sort of lack of federal support for some of these problems. And certainly in social media, we got some questions about why the government doesn't seem to have a strong plan to address this issue. And we have that problem with disinformation. It doesn't seem to be focused on any, no agency has been really tasked with this. And a lot of people are wondering why the government doesn't have a more unified approach toward this problem.
It's a fair question. So I will say that I have found the FBI, absent the kind of misstatement after this event on Saturday when it said it wasn't anti-Semitic. I found the FBI to be excellent, and we've worked with their agents who are really on it. And I found DHS to be pretty good too. They're on it as well. But it does seem like, to fight anti-Semitism, Katie, like all forms of hate, there's no silver bullet. You need a whole of society strategy.
And it's not anti-Semitism, to your earlier point. It's sort of hate in general that is really toxic. And as you mentioned, with the whole pyramid idea, sort of permeating into society and festering and fostering this antagonism that may have be a serious threat to democracy.
It's going to require government and business and civil society and academia. It's going to require government, people in public positions of authority like you using your platform as you're doing today to call attention to this issue. Because again, there's no kind of pixie dust we can spray on this and fix it. It's going to be a long fight. It's an all hands on deck moment. And I think the stakes aren't as high as just protecting the Jewish community. Because, Katie, I don't think anti-Semitism is a Jewish problem. It's an American problem. It's a sign of the decay in society. And so dealing with anti-Semitism and broader forms of hate should be a shared project for all of us, because it's about, again, holding our society together.
I wanted to ask you about sort of social media platforms, which you referred to earlier. You said Facebook is sort of the most fertile ground for the dissemination of this kind of hate. Are you optimistic the Select Committee investigating January 6th is going to come up with some recommendations? Because we've come up with recommendations as well with the Aspen Committee about super spreaders and trying to make sure that people who spread information resulting in harming other people are held accountable legally. But what can the January 6th committee do? What do you mean?
Well, I think one of the things that's disappointing, it's like the $64,000 question. It's hard. I think first of all, we just, sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think it's really important to everybody understands the role of the president and the role of the people around him, because by understanding the role, hopefully we can avoid a repeat of that scenario. The most important thing I think is getting the voting rights, getting the HR 1 passed, like making sure that everyone has equal access to vote, that it isn't complicated or kind of, blocked by whether it's gerrymandering or kind of partisan positioning. I think that's crucial. So I think if the committee, number one, spreads a light on it, number two, creates a space for HR 1 to be passed, that those would be two huge things. I think secondly, the social media piece does need to be addressed, Katie. As you use the term, I would call social media a super spreader of hate. And unless we get our arms around it, whether it's revisiting 230 in some way, and I know there was a debate about this on the commission, or, there are other things that can be done. Algorithms, the founding fathers didn't contemplate freedom of speech to protect the ability of algorithms to amplify the kind of madness that's all over the place. I also don't think the founding fathers, when they talked about freedom of expression, meant that it had to be instantaneous the moment you have an idea. So why not, before somebody uploads a video of the shooting of Muslims in Christchurch or the killing of, Latinos in El Paso, Texas, why couldn't you just slow it down? I don't understand why you couldn't do that. I think there are things that need to happen, and I think they need to happen sooner rather than later, because social media continues to be our kids, the next generation, they're not getting their news from, the Today Show. They're getting it from TikTok. And unless we reorient the rules to make sure that TikTok is a safe place for those kids and for all of us, then I think if we don't get those things together quickly, Katie, it's going to be very difficult to ever put this genie back in the bottle.
Having said that, you are optimistic that it's not too late. And I have to say, it's hard for me to be optimistic when I look at your book, read everything, when I, witness the rancor and the division in this country, the misinformation that's spread by some quote unquote legitimate news outlets that really are more interested in ratings than facts. So, why are you optimistic?
Well, look, this is the most extraordinary. Like, I am someone who believes in American exceptionalism. This is the most vibrant, resilient democracy in the history of humanity. We've survived, economic depression, world wars, domestic disturbances. Think about it. Back during the days of Kent State, in the 1970s, the police were shooting college demonstrators in the back as they ran away. This is an amazing country that has shown an ability to come through so much adversity. I am optimistic that we will be able to do it again, but it will require, like I said, I think a whole of society strategy. Democracy is not a spectator sport you can watch from the cheap seats. We got to figure out ways to, from the social media piece to reinvigorating civil society. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic as you are, and I think I've heard that argument before. We've survived so much. I hope that's true, but it really is hard in a divided nation to be on the same page about what needs to happen and how we can work together. And I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Maybe, look, I tell you something. America, someone said to me, what's your plan B? Somebody said to me, your grandfather had a plan B. He came here. Your wife had a plan B. She came here. What's your plan B? And I said to the person, this is my plan B. This is plan B. So we have got to make this work. We don't have a choice. So I know the odds seem long in many ways, but it's always darkest before the dawn, Katie. And I am, fingers crossed, optimistic that my book, that some of the revival you're seeing in civil society, I am hopeful that we'll be able to turn this around. I don't think there's any other way.
And I think a lot of it is also about education. I mean, what gives me optimism is young people. Although I also think one of the things that you talk about in your book is intolerance from the left. And, that you're not a fan of cancel culture, which I'd like to talk about another time because I'm thinking along those lines. But, there's a level of intolerance in society that is, that affects both sides.
Yes, 100%. It's like, it's Newtonian. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I'm not someone who believes in like this false theory of equivalence, but there's a reality that, again, like the cancel culture that shuts somebody down for making a single error is, I think, I want to cancel that kind of cancel culture.
Or for simply posing a question or disagreeing with a particular point of view.
Yeah. Orthodoxy is generally not good, right? I think we need to have a kind of pragmatism because the world isn't just lapse into such comfortable hues as black and white. There's an awful lot of gray. And acknowledging that doesn't diminish our own moral leadership. It's actually, frankly, an admission of reality as it is. And we got to work to make it better.
Can you show your book? Do you have your book covers?
Yes, I do.
This is kind of a low tech thing. Well, it's backwards, but it could happen.
It is backwards. I wish I could do it differently.
How's the book doing?
It's doing great. I've been this is my first book. I've never done it before. I worked really hard on it. And I've been really pleased. I'm hearing from people all over the country. And even though we're in this COVID world, I'm doing a bunch of book talks. So that's been pretty cool. I think we're just in this moment where people are looking for ways to make sense of the madness. And so I think some people are finding the book is helpful in that regard. And that's gratifying.
I think maybe if you could have a specific list of things, tangible, practical things that everyone can do, because I think what happens when you address these big thorny issues, people like me and like other people are like, okay, this is awful. Can our democracy survive? And they don't really know what to do because it seems so overwhelming and huge. So I
Yeah,
think what would be really helpful, and maybe you'll write it for our newsletter, like
I
eight,
would love to do that.
8 things you can do to reduce hate in America and to facilitate conversations,
Hmm.
to cross the divide, and to, all kinds of things. Because I think people feel very powerless, Jonathan.
I
And
am I'm
it's
game
really
to
frustrating.
write that for you. I'm game to do that. Yeah, because again, there's small things we can do. There's ways we can speak out. There are ways we can share facts. There are ways we can show strength. Um, and a lot of it's just stepping in, right? Like I think this is an up, to kind of paraphrase Sheryl Sandberg, this is a moment when we all need to lean in, and I mean
Well,
that.
can you talk to Cheryl about doing something about Facebook?
I'm not getting the Hanukkah cards anymore since I took on Facebook with Rashad about a year and a half ago. But yeah, I mean, Facebook. Look, if we are going to tackle this, Facebook has got to be part of the solution. And nothing would make me happier. Nothing.
Anyway, why don't you write that up for us? And
Yep.
everyone watching, if you're interested, sign up for Wake Up Call. Go to katiecouric.com. We'll be in your inbox every morning, bright and early. And then we can give some real life advice for how we can try to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
Here, 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 here.
Great to see you, Jonathan.
It's always good to see you. Thank you for having me so much. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Be well, be healthy and happy this year. And thanks to everyone for watching.
And congratulations on the book and much
Thank
success
you.
with it. And yeah, let's come up with some solutions.
That's a deal.
Okay.
Thanks, Katie. Take
Thanks,
care. Bye.
everybody. Bye.